Every now and then, I meet someone who's changing the world for the better by their sheer will alone. Whether they're authors, activists, or adventurers, these people are blazing a path with their deep enthusiasm and allowing the world to follow. Their passion is strong, and my passion is to tell their stories. I am Brian Platt, and this is Passion Project. Hey, what's going on, everyone? In this podcast, I speak with Chris Duke of the Phoenix Conservancy Project, who's headed up the newly formed Madagascar Project. We speak about Madagascar, a country that's kind of written off as a lost cause for a lot of people. And in particular, they're working to protect something called the Lost Forest of Ivohboro, which I'm probably mispronouncing. But it's a really cool forest. It actually wasn't really discovered until 2016. So we talk about that. And Chris also explains why Madagascar is still, even though it's one of the most biodiverse areas on the planet, it's home to all of the planet's lemurs, and it's still one of the most undervalued ecosystems out there, even to other conservation groups, which is really interesting. A couple things to note: audio quality. So Chris is recording on location in a South Dakota hotel lobby. So to my understanding, there was like a race car rally going on at that time. And then also in the podcast, he mentions a few spices that by purchasing them could directly help the Madagascar rainforest. So they're vanilla, cinnamon, and a spice called Voatsiperifery. So it's spelled Voatsiperifery. So Voatsiperifery pepper. So for both Voatsiperifery and cinnamon, you can buy them at Spice Trekkers. And for vanilla, he mentioned this place called carry.com. I will put a link in the description of the podcast too, but those will directly help the rainforest and also make your food taste super unique. So one last thing, I was bummed I couldn't tell him this, but as we were talking, I thought of this quote. So in the podcast, Chris mentions that since it would take about 100 years for the rainforest to regenerate, he'll never see the end of this project. So it made me think of the old Greek proverb, "A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit in." So that made me think of him and the Madagascar Project. Today I speak with the Madagascar Project Manager of the Phoenix Conservancy, Chris Duke. The Phoenix Conservancy works to restore endangered ecosystems globally for the communities that depend on them. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Brian. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks a lot for joining me.
Yeah, no problem. I really appreciate you having me and getting a chance to talk to you today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I understand that this is a new project for you guys. So when does it start? What made you want to do it, and how long have you been planning it for?
Well, this project is, as you said, relatively new, but then again, so are we. So we founded in 2016 and got our 501c3 in 2017. And this project has been in the works since early 2018. So we had our first conversations that kind of got things moving a little bit more than a year and a half ago at this point. So relatively new, but.
Gotcha. Okay. So when I first spoke with Ben Stone, talking about the Palouse Prairie and kind of the more national and local efforts that the Phoenix Conservancy has, he kind of mentioned it was a bit more difficult of a project, at least this Madagascar side. It was a bit more difficult than others to set up. What was like the hardest thing you had to do with setting up, or what made it so difficult?
Well, that's really true. When we got started, we had discussed pretty clearly that the problems we were hoping to address, which is basically just habitat degradation across the board. You had to think about it in 3 different scales simultaneously. So local, national, and global. And so we had local and national kind of set up, and then the global project, we were originally looking at a couple of places that, from my personal experience, I used to live in Venezuela, so we were initially looking at that as a starting point, and then Venezuela's situation has gotten drastically worse even since I was there, which was around 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
So not right. Actually, I now just realized I've got that wrong. 2014, but it's gotten much worse. So we kind of were looking for another spot to start. What makes the international thing difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the most important thing that we can't do easily that we can do with Palouse Prairie and then relatively easily with our national project in the Great Plains is it's really hard to get to the site where you're working.
Right. Yeah.
Madagascar is just notorious for insanely bad roads. So even once you get to Madagascar, which is almost exactly the farthest point on Earth that you can possibly be from Seattle, Washington, and from the Northwest without starting to get closer. Well, even once you get there, the roads are just insane. So just getting to the site, it makes it hard because it's hard to talk from a place of authority about a place that you can't get to very easily or haven't been yet. So when we first get started, it's really hard to convince people that we know what we're talking about. From literature and conversations alone. So that was probably the hardest part about getting started. I think really thinking that you can formulate a really good project without getting there was also kind of a chicken and egg problem. Especially as a young nonprofit, one of our most important kind of currencies is trust, and it's hard to get people to trust that we really mean what we say without actually doing it.
Right.
But it's also really hard to make sure that we know what we're doing without getting there first. So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem in terms of formulating a problem to get there. And then once you do get there, obviously our local national projects, we don't really have a problem with language barrier, but in Madagascar, the primary language that is spoken in a lot of the country, that's the official administrative language, is French. And then the language that's a common language that's spoken all over the island is Malagasy. So not only that, but just the actual mechanisms of communicating in a language that's not your native language is a little tough, let alone two. And then sort of compounding that is that you're talking to people about a place that almost certainly they've never been.
Yep.
Just because so few people have been there. And so you're trying to get them to talk to understand the value of what you're doing about a place that they don't personally know, and then translating that into a term that kind of gives it scale. It's like the difference between saying, oh, this something costs $1 million, and people say, okay, whatever, that's fine, it's $1 million. I hear that all the time. But when you actually show somebody what 1 million of anything looks like, it totally locks it into their mentality. So I'd say that's kind of difficult to do if people don't have a concept of what kind of the reality of the system is there.
Yeah, which makes sense. So why did you guys, I read you guys were looking for, a place in Central and South America, just looking for other locations to do an international project, right? There's Indonesia, Southeast Asia. Why did you choose, and I guess why did you prioritize Madagascar with all the difficulties, knowing that it's, tough to get to, it's really tough for people to, visualize the actual issues. So why did you choose Madagascar before all of them?
Well, I mean, to be perfectly honest, some days it feels like masochism. But we deliberately sought out the biggest problems. And,
right.
Full well knowing that we're throwing ourselves into probably the most thorny, or I mean, it's hard to quantify that, one of the most difficult places to do effective conservation in the world. And it's just a combination of circumstance and other things. It is absolutely, at least in our opinion, the most urgently pressing concern in terms of conservation, from a combination of just the insane endemism that you see in Madagascar, to the lineages that are there that have been extinct elsewhere on the planet for millions and millions and millions of years, to just the state of utter and almost total degradation of that island as a whole. And they're kind of on a knife edge. And so we deliberately prioritize Madagascar because it's really just the center of the storm. It's about as bad as it gets. That's also true of a couple of other places. but what really kind of tipped the scales for Madagascar is in spite of their relatively recent political instability, they are not the most politically unstable place that we were considering. And
Gotcha.
our other top two front runners were Venezuela and the Philippines.
Yeah.
While we are still very interested in those places, at the moment, Madagascar won, not only for the biodiversity that's at risk and for the severity of the situation, but also just because it was logistically, even though getting there and operating there is logistically difficult, it's not as politically volatile at this point as the other two options that are definitely on our future agenda. But we're getting a good start here. And then sort of a more romantic woo-woo kind of answer to that is that our symbol is a phoenix. And so that the reason we're called the Phoenix Conservancy, we get asked that constantly about, what do we do in Arizona? And we say nothing, and people get confused. But that symbol was chosen deliberately for the symbolism of the world's ecosystems rising from the metaphorical ashes, and being reborn from this state of destruction they're in currently. And Madagascar's major scourge is fire. And so what better place for a phoenix to really plant their flag than
there you go.
Literally burning to the ground. So,
and I bet you wouldn't be there in the first place if you didn't think you could have some major successes and some major wins, which is the flip side of the coin and super promising. And also, you hear about a lot of environmental and rainforest organizations, and a lot of them do Central and South America. Indonesia is a big one, but I don't often hear about a lot of organizations working in Madagascar, even though it's one of the most biodiverse places on the earth.
Right. So there's a reason for that. There actually are some extremely dedicated people that have been there for decades, and what has made things so difficult, I think, and so as getting into this project, it would be incredibly arrogant to say that, oh well, what we really need is us, and that'll fix it.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
But what we have realized and been extremely grateful for is that it's more about timing. We have been extremely lucky to be the beneficiaries of decades and decades of work of so many organizations, from CPOLI and Center Valbio and Missouri Botanical Garden and Duke Lemur Center, and just dozens of others that are focused on working in Madagascar that have had a really, really difficult road in terms of learning the realities of what it is like to work there and learning a lot of the lessons that we're benefiting from. The reason that it's kind of gone quiet of recent is that as of their coup from 2009 that is spilled over all the way to 2013, Conservation International dialed back their efforts substantially, at least for a period, while they were prioritizing other places. And to be fair, they were doing something similar to what we were doing, which was looking at places that where they could make a greater impact with less political risk for a short period of time. So it's left a bit of a vacuum there in their absence, but I think people are getting a lot more interested in now and getting back into it.
Interesting.
But like I said, we there not a day goes by where we don't sit down and think, all the lucky stars we have that we're getting to benefit from the dedication of so many people to have gone through, okay, this works, this doesn't. This worked in Asia, this doesn't work here. This worked in Africa, this doesn't work here. Here's what's better. Just because Madagascar is such a unique system in so many ways, that it really kind of takes a very, very tailored approach to be successful. And we've been very lucky to have all that experience behind us, even though we haven't personally had to struggle through what so many of our colleagues have struggled through it and put us in a position to do.
Yeah, which is a good point. Like, we're all, working with each other and helping each other out, especially in, conservation issues and efforts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what initiatives do you have planned? What are you, what are the long-term projects and short-term projects for your Madagascar project?
Sure. The most pressing issue that it seems to be almost constant. To my knowledge, there's not a lot of places that don't have this concern, which is fire. So in Madagascar, in the short term, almost every conservation project that I've run into so far, and like I said, we keep reaching out and meeting new people doing awesome stuff. The first and foremost thing that needs to happen is, if you're working with forest or you're planning to plant forest or restore almost anything, you need to make sure that you're protected from fire. So in the very short term, fire, protecting our forest and our site. We work in a forest called Ivohboro, which is in southeastern Madagascar. It's a very isolated piece of forest, and it's being constantly pressed at by fire. Essentially every single year, there's fires that burn right up to the edge of the forest. So step is to keep the forest from just going up in flames on its own, but also to provide a barrier and sort of an area for us to start doing restoration and for the forest to start regenerating itself naturally. You know, it's pretty hard for it to grow or expand when every seedling it puts out, a few feet from the forest gets burned every year. So
right, yeah.
Fire's the big one in the short term. And then following that, one of the major lessons that's been learned in a number of different places is that you can't go from what it is now directly back into rainforest. And the reason being is that and this is actually part of the reason that I'm sure in talking to other people that have done rainforest work, you've heard the basic sentiment that, once rainforest is gone, it's gone forever. Mm-hmm. That is a conclusion that was made in sort of an oversimplification in a lot of ways of saying that when you lose rainforest, you lose a microclimate that's associated with the rainforest. So you lose the cool temperatures, the high humidity, and a lot of the moisture that the rainforest kind of holds into the system. That all goes as soon as you cut the forest down, which means that it gets taken over by a different steady state. So without bridging the gap between rainforest and what exists now, which is largely sun-baked, very dry, extremely sun exposed, degraded grassland, there's really no bridge to get back to forest.
Yeah.
So our next major priority there is to establish, especially kind of tailored for Madagascar, fire breaks and fire barriers that consist of a double scrape down to soil with a large median of backburned grass to create just basically a huge gap of about 20 to 30 to 40 meters wide that really, really strong winds can't blow sparks over.
Like a firewall kind of.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
So around a traditional fire break would just be something that the recommendation is about twice. Your fire break should be about twice as wide as the dominant fuel, and the dominant fuel in that area is grass that's less than a meter tall. But the thing is that in a lot of areas of Madagascar, the wind just gets screaming. So you can do that all you want, and the fire will just jump your line. So what we've learned from our colleague Chris Birkinshaw at Missouri Botanical Gardens is he's found a really effective means for controlling fire, which is, like I said, two parallel breaks with a large median of backburned, fuel-free areas that get burnt out at the beginning of the dry season, right about the least vulnerable time where a fire can't get away and under extreme supervision, but eliminating a fuel load for something 50 meters wide. And then on the other end of that, piling up all the grass and vegetable matter and charcoal that you remove, and then creating a very good spot to establish these pioneer species. So trees and shrubs that are very good at colonizing. Sorry, I'm being invaded over here.
That's all right.
That are very, very good at colonizing grasslands, and then they're trees and shrubs that can create kind of enough of a toehold and enough of a microclimate for rainforest species to get started.
Wow. Okay, so let me see if I can work that back of like.
Sure. So, sorry. Yeah, that was a lot to throw at you there.
Yeah, no worries. Just unpacking. It's like, so you have this obviously you have this area you're trying to protect, but around that there's a fire break. But then there's also the potential, like you mentioned in a toehold, for that to recover and for these new areas to in turn become more. I mean, you're probably not going to get a rainforest anytime soon. Like what was just lost, but something similar could arise from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the rainforest species that we have there, a lot of them are very slow growing. So as you said, it's kind of a weird feeling to be starting a project that I know I will never see the end of. So like it will not be, even possible to classify it as fully recovered forest for 100+ years. But a lot of studies and surveys have shown that doesn't actually matter. It's what really kind of matters is regenerating forest, and secondary forest is, of a lot more value, especially to the lemurs that live in our forests. It's a lot more valuable than just degraded grassland in every direction. And what's really important is kind of setting it on the right path and making sure that it has the right conditions so that you're not wasting time and money planting seedlings where they're going to die. And some of the really hard lessons that have been learned by conservationists in Madagascar are trying to move rainforest species out into this grassland and then having them just get throttled by the grass, and then not having the right conditions, the right humidity, the right temperature, the right water. And that's really what's held a lot of efforts back. But like I said, being lucky enough to have those lessons already learned for us, the strategy is basically to stop the fires, to keep from burning natural recruitment, plant pioneer species that can restart the forest cycle, create shade, create water, start creating leaf litter to create a nutrient base for these little trees from the rainforest to grow in. But then also trying to create habitat that is attractive enough to draw some of the lemurs that live in our forest out, and start dispersing some seeds and doing some natural regeneration too.
And we were talking a little bit, earlier, but you guys are working in a particular forest that is unique and a little bit, I don't want to say resilient to fire, but it's in a unique area. It's surrounded by, a couple mountains. Do you want to talk about that? The Lost Forest of, I'm going to try it, Ivohboro?
Yep, that's it.
Boom.
I mean, the likelihood is that I'm not saying it exactly right either, so that's
well, fine. Then I'm definitely not saying it right.
So our forest is, it's been known by a lot of different names. So what we've settled on, and the local name is Ivohboro, which is roughly translates to, in that the Bara dialect of Malagasy, as the place for the birds, or a place for the birds. So we've settled on the full title of the Lost Forest of Ivohboro, which one of the other monikers it's had is the Crystal Forest. So as you were saying, it's a very lucky forest in a lot of ways, because the region that it happens to exist in is the Ius region in very, very southeastern Madagascar. So right on the border between kind of the wetter areas to the north, and then the famous spiny forest where you have those crazy octopus trees with all the thorns. And
Yep.
All these really, really angry looking trees that are in arid and semi-arid forests at the south. So it's kind of right in the borderlands. But Ivohboro is essentially a sunken protected valley inside a mountain ridge, and the mountains are this glittering white quartzite, so little quartz crystals that have been jammed together to kind of make a mountain. And the reason it's still there at all is because on a few fronts, these giant peaks are obviously inflammable, so they block these massive fires from getting into the forest. It's not fully protected. So that's, like I said, we're lucky in terms of we don't have to actually encircle the whole forest with these fire breaks. We just have to close it off, basically connecting the dots between these giant mountains.
Gotcha.
And so being the only forest for miles in any direction, the largest forest, excluding some of the small fragments to the north that have escaped being burned for various reasons, just being in hollows and gulches and stuff like that. The largest major forest that's close to it is Pic d'Ivoire Special Reserve, which is about 20 kilometers to the east. So it's almost entirely isolated from any forest in any direction. And what that's resulted in is it's kind of a refuge for stuff that very likely had a larger distribution in the past, at least before humans got there. And what makes it really unique is that people didn't really know it was there, and hadn't really formally explored it until 2016.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, it's a little nuts, and that's why we've referred to it as Lost Forest. Is it's just a forest that's kind of been forgotten. But Senator Valbio and a number of scientists from Missouri Botanical Garden and other sources came in and took a look at it. And what they found there, among a lot of other things, were at least 2 species of lemur that haven't been described. So species of lemur that nobody knew existed at all are sheltering in this forest, along with ring-tailed lemurs, which everybody kind of knows. It's King Julian from the movies, and you think of lemur, you think of ringtails, and they're there too, and also endangered rather severely. But the 2 lemurs that we're really focused on are the ones that don't exist anywhere else. And this forest is not big. It's about 3,000 acres. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 1/7 of the size of Manhattan Island. Yeah. So not a very big forest.
Wow. And I mean, that's the big thing too about Madagascar is that it's so biodiverse. There's a lot of species there that are endemic to there. So, like, I'm sure that had something to do with your decision to go there and your decision to help there. But yeah, because it's so isolated, it's also one of the most undervalued ecosystems on the planet. So, like we were mentioning, there's a lot of organizations that don't go there, that don't really, or that at least we don't hear about. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's so, almost underappreciated?
I think that a lot of that is tropical forests generally. They're certainly with it. It's hard to say because in my lifetime, I've kind of grown up in sort of an awakening consciousness of the value of these things, where save the rainforest is something I've been hearing since I was a little kid. So it started to be appreciated, but for a very long time, I think rainforests, for anybody who's been in one, if you haven't been in a rainforest, I think it's easy to view them in sort of a romantic, kind of Fern Gully kind of way, where it's just this magical place where there's flowers everywhere and everybody gets along. The practical upshot of a rainforest is it is really a difficult ecosystem for humans to be in. So if you live near it, it is, I think when you see a rainforest actually, intact and extant, it seems massive and inexhaustible and impenetrable and just totally invulnerable because it's just this wall of life. Yeah. It would take you, you can get lost immediately. You can get disoriented. There's just so many animals that want some blood from you or just want to eat you. And I mean, not in Madagascar, but in rainforests generally. So I think that for anything that seems inexhaustible, people don't tend to value. And then in a lot of continental areas, there's always more to go to, and there's always more, to conquer. And I think that it's just being on an island, Madagascar's forest in particular, if you just look at it in terms of a raw numbers perspective, so number of species is not as high as you would find in some of these places like Manu in Peru and some of these other iconic rainforests. But that's largely because it's on an island. But as you said, they're almost everything that's there is completely unique to Madagascar.
Right.
And I think that the mentality and the tradition of trying to conquer this thing that seems so imposing and is such an unnatural ecosystem for for a lot of humans and just seems like this dark monster. If you live right next to it, I think that mentality of sort of trying to tame it and turn it into something open and bright and sunny and something that's more comfortable for humans is kind of at the root of why for a long time rainforest hasn't really been as valued as it could be. And I think now, in terms of conservation, as we talked about, people that would be interested in doing their best to save it, I think sometimes just write it off as a lost cause.
Mm-hmm.
That's not totally fair, but there's so many other places that desperately need help that it's kind of hard to narrow it down. And Madagascar has just become, it's gained somewhat of an undeserved and somewhat of a deserved reputation as kind of a black hole and kind of a difficult place to work. So I think that even though conservationists know what's at stake, it's like, well, okay, we've got this island of lemurs. It's still facing all these challenges, or we could invest in working in, Sumatra and trying to battle palm oil and save tigers and rhinos and a lot of other big megafauna. So.
And we were talking briefly before, but you mentioned that we're talking about the new president, Rajaleen. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that as well. But some people say, he's an environmental disaster. But it's not always that cut and dry, right? I mean, we were just chatting. Hey, he's trying to get people to plant 10 trees. He understands that people or that the trees are being lost at such a rapid rate. How does he play into this? How does he, he was elected, in January 2019.
Mm-hmm.
How does he play into this? How does he work? Does he complicate things for you guys, or does he, set a better path? How does that work out?
Well, he's certainly been called a lot of things, and a lot of them he's been called by his rivals, of course. But
good point.
Rajaleen is not, he's certainly no environmental champion. But the interesting thing about Madagascar is that it's gotten so bad that it's impossible to ignore it now. So even from a political standpoint, it's not something anyone can afford to ignore. And I think in a lot of places in the world where environmental degradation hasn't gotten that bad yet, to the point where people can't find water, they can't find any land that can support any sort of crop, they really don't have as easy of a time believing that things are really, really bad environmentally and they need to change as they are in Madagascar, where it's now become something where it's very difficult for a lot of people to make a living and survive, or even have water to drink. So politically, I think Andres is sort of, I usually refer to him as Andre, not because we're on first name basis, but it's just easier to pronounce than his last name.
I'm doing that too from now on.
So Rajaleen is, he has, I didn't know this until actually I was just there in March. And he's made a personal sort of directive and kind of a call of duty on the Malagasy, and saying that every Malagasy should plant 10 trees a year to help turn things around. And then what he's done on a government level is a directive to replant 40,000 hectares of forest every single year at least for the foreseeable future of his terms. So while that may not have a lot of enforcement and a lot of teeth, so to speak, he's really, it's gotten to a point where it's no longer, this hotbed political thing like it might be in the United States. If you suggested that we restore 40,000 acres of original habitat across the United States a year, that kind of brands politicians and kind of, oh, well, they're trying to just, remove all this land. Oh, they're trying to take it away from other uses.
Right.
And in Madagascar, it's just to the point where it's like, no, this has to happen if we want to continue living in Madagascar.
What percentage of forests do they have? At what rate are they decreasing?
Well, honestly, the decrease is slowing down.
Okay.
Which is not as positive as it sounds,
okay.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
the closest estimates that I've seen a lot of variation in estimates, but the one that we kind of operate out of is that about 95% of the forest that was all probably here when people arrived about 2,000 years ago is gone. So anywhere from 90 to 97% of the original forest has been totally gone. And in fact, the Antananarivo was named actually for the beautiful forested hills that surrounded it when it was founded. Not anymore. It's all
wow.
pretty out, red soil with grass and some eucalyptus, some introduced eucalyptus and pines that can kind of get hold in that crappy soil. But almost all of it's gone. So the reason that deforestation by acreage has slowed down is that almost all of the rainforest left is in a protected area. And if it's not protected, it's almost essentially gone.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is kind of a double-edged sword.
It is. It's not. It's a great statistic if you want to feel good about it, but it's like, well, there's a reason that it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not to say that they're not still losing forests and there's not still illegal logging even within protected areas. It's definitely still losing forests every year. It's just the scale of it just can't be on the scale that it was because it's not there anymore.
Right. Yeah, they just can't. It's unsustainable to keep going at that rate.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest things that I really enjoyed when I spoke with Ben at first a while back was that the Phoenix Conservancy always makes sure to involve local people. And it's something I've heard repeated after, but Ben was the first one to really touch upon it and mention, hey, this is a pillar of our organization. We always include the community because we don't know everything and we're not supposed to know everything. The people who live here and who have lived here for years and centuries, in some cases, know a lot more than us about this area. So we're going to go in with, a fair amount of humility saying we can help. We know how to, connect some dots, but we don't know everything. And I really love that. I really enjoyed that. So for this Madagascar project, how are you involving local people?
Well, so we've done really from day one. So as soon as we got on the ground, one of the most important meetings I had was with the elders of all the villages that live around the base of the mountain. So these are people that know the forest in a way that is just so fundamentally beyond what any scientist knows. They have local names for animals and plants that we don't even know as a scientific community that they exist, but they've grown up with these things, so they know stuff that nobody knows. And ultimately, if they really didn't see a value in keeping the forest there, it wouldn't be there anymore. And the thing to remember about this is that ultimately it's not something that belongs to me. It doesn't belong to Phoenix. It doesn't belong to anybody except for the people that really depend on this forest. So this meeting was to explain to the forest and sort of the guardians, the stewards of this forest, what we were thinking about doing, what we were planning. And you talked about humility, but that's so huge. And especially in Madagascar, that the general culture is, I actually didn't believe this until I was there, but there's on a spectrum from like really abrupt to like British polite. Madagascar is so far beyond British polite that you have to be extremely delicately and direct. So it's not an issue of just like, hey, what's up? Can we grow more forest? It's much more of a, here's what we're wishing to do with your permission, if this is acceptable to you. And it's a very, very delicate process. But
I mean, they're even more polite than British,
well beyond it. Yeah. So if you had, somebody, actually one of the guys that was down there that I met explained it as, if you were trying to make a good impression on your significant other's parents and they already don't like you, that's like the level of politeness that's acceptable in Madagascar.
I love it.
So humility is a huge part of that, and recognizing that this isn't where I'm from, and I don't know this forest the way that they do. And ultimately, I live in the United States, so in a very proximate sense, in terms of, do I get my water from this forest? No, of course not. Um, do I believe very strongly in preserving biodiversity and allowing it to stay on this earth as it has as much of a right as people do? Yeah, absolutely. But it has to be done not from an external source, not some external, you know, enforcement from above. That's kind of the old model, is buy up the forest and then lock everybody out and say, get out of here. You're hurting lemurs. And that's neither pragmatic nor realistic. And so including people from day one, and that's true of all our projects, our big criteria are that we like restoring the rainforest is one thing. So that's just a technical issue. How do you actually do that? The real trick is, how do you do that in a way that benefits the people that depend on it at every single step? And some of the benefits take 20 years to really realize. For example, the changes in the water cycle, nutrients, and so on. They're sort of abstract. So with our Madagascar project, we talked already about building fire breaks and sort of the nuts and bolts of how do you regrow a rainforest. Mm-hmm. One of the key components about Madagascar is that a lot of people live, and I say below the poverty line, but just for the scale of it was staggering to me. Most of that country makes less than $100 a year. So a couple of nights out in the United States is an entire year's salary for your average Malagasy, and a lot of them make less than that.
Wow.
So it's an astonishing kind of paradigm. Mm-hmm. But what that also means is that you can change, without exaggeration, hundreds and hundreds of lives with what would be seen as a very small amount of money in the United States. Mm-hmm. And so what we're doing is making sure that in the immediate sense, when we're planting this rainforest, we're actually hiring a lot of people as basically their job is replanting rainforest that ultimately benefits them. And we're not really going in there and saying, you need to do this because the world needs these rainforests. It's more of an exercise in, we have access to resources that some of the villagers around the base of the mountain maybe not, and we're more allowing them to do what they already want to do, which is protect their forest and regrow it.
Gotcha.
And so for the long term, what's going to sustain that is the fact that there's several things that grow in Madagascar rainforest that are of extreme value, and one of them, strangely enough, is vanilla. So Madagascar vanilla has already got a reputation as being some of the best in the world. It's actually not even from there. Vanilla is from Central America and Mexico.
Interesting.
At least originally. But it's an orchid that has to climb trees, and it has to live in rainforest. And that's just the climate that it likes as an orchid. And so it's one of these really awesome crops that it's not like coffee where it's like you have to seek out shade-grown coffee, but a lot of coffee does really good if there's just no rainforest at all. Orchids have to grow in a rainforest, most of them, at least in Madagascar. And these vanilla orchids definitely have to. And there's also this interesting spice called Voatsiperifery pepper, which is a black peppercorn. You can actually buy it on Amazon, and it's essentially incorruptible as a luxury item. There's no way for that spice to be grown except in Madagascar rainforest. It just cannot be done.
Wow.
It's native and endemic to Madagascar. So Voatsiperifery, if you want something really crazy to spice up your kitchen, it's a black peppercorn that has aromatics that the best way I can describe it is that it smells like the forest does.
Wow.
Which is weird, but it smells like sort of wet earth and rain and flowers and just, it's crazy stuff. But
or umami taste?
Yeah, honestly, it's not that I've ever tasted in my entire life. It was it's sort of burned into my memory banks now, and I smell it and I think of Madagascar, but it was a totally unique smell. So
wow.
There are these really, really valuable commodities that can grow in rainforest, and that's ultimately financially what kind of reinforces the system. So our long-term goal is, and what we're working towards sort of on a 20-year scale, is not only making sure that there's these short-term jobs to help build trust and develop this relationship with people, and make sure that they realize that ultimately this is not for us. This is not so that we can own it and take anything from them. And that was one of the most important messages I had to get across in these meetings, was we are not here to take anything from you. We are not here to just give something to you and walk away. We're here to allow you to build your own future. And in terms of working with local communities, the best thing that we can do is create a framework and an infrastructure that they can run, and give them the opportunity and the resources to do it, by kind of creating an entire economy around the forest itself. So the long-term plan involves using aspects from all over the world. For example, beekeeping, for example, other spices like turmeric and cinnamon. Cinnamon is actually a tree, a pioneer rainforest tree that grows pretty well in regenerating secondary forests, so it's kind of ideal. But growing these,
really,
yeah, it's actually one of these species that one of our prerequisites for all these pioneer species we've talked about is, okay, great, it creates a forest climate. That's kind of the bare minimum, but does it have other value that people can use? And if so, it's a winner. All of our species that we're considering for using this, most of them are native to Madagascar, but they all have to have some sort of secondary value that benefits the people that are doing this. So as the project kind of progresses, our job is to create more and more opportunities so that they have this really versatile bag of economic tricks that all tie back to having the forest and being stewards. And so one of our last sort of key components is that we are working on, well, not working on, but we have it planned out already, that about 3 sort of tiers through this process, we will be founding a Malagasy NGO, so run by the Malagasy, and starting to hand it off, and making sure that, to avoid any sort of corruption or problems with that it is built to have international oversight, but ultimately that it belongs to the Malagasy. It's run by the Malagasy, and it's their forest, it's their stewardship, and we become less and less of a part of it, so that through the future it's not ours. So I don't know, that's kind of a long rambling answer, but that's kind of what we're doing there. And ultimately, like I said, we can't get to the forest very easily. I'm in Washington State, so the commitment to get there, not only financially but in terms of time, is a really uncomfortably long flight. to get there. Whereas, all of our friends that live around the base of the mountain, they can get up into the forest any day they want. Mm-hmm. So successful conservation, in our view, definitely doesn't start with this strangers from on high and from a different weird place that know nothing about the forest, sort of bulldozing in and saying, you're going to do it this way, but showing a better way and creating the opportunity for the people that live there and know it best and really sincerely do love it, to do what's best for not only themselves but for the forest.
Yeah, I mean, it's the definition of working together. Like, both components are equally as important. You guys have had success in the past in you're both in your backyards and nationally throughout America, and people live there and do care about the ecosystem. So yeah, it's both are crucial for each other to survive.
It's sort of a recognition of what we can bring to the table versus what's there.
Yeah.
What's already there is wisdom, knowledge, and a whole bunch of people that care about it, but also need to eat and need to drink water and need to survive. And so what we can bring to it is not any of those things. There's no reason for us to pretend we know more than we do.
I love it. Yeah. Well, cool. So, you guys are doing tons of work, tons of great work. how do people help you? How can people help both, the Phoenix Conservancy, but also in particular the Madagascar Project?
Yeah. Well, the good news is, like I said, it doesn't take a lot. You can change somebody's life, and without exaggeration, for $10. I think that's one of the most humbling realizations, was that paying somebody, not everybody, but a lot of people in Madagascar, if they work for a day and they earn $10, that's essentially the equivalent of somebody that makes $30,000 a year being handed $3,000 for a day of work.
Yeah.
Which is, so, like, on that scale, it's pretty amazing. So it doesn't take a lot. But in terms of what people out there and your viewers can do to get really directly involved and really make a difference that is hard to fully, I can't really exaggerate it. It's hard to encapsulate how much of a difference it makes. We have a fundraiser going on right now, inspired by the mountains itself. So it's a Crystal Jewelry Fundraiser. So we've got handmade jewelry, a couple of different styles that we're selling as part of this fundraiser and giving out as a thank you for donating. And you can find that on our webpage, which is phoenixconservancy.org. There's a direct link to the fundraiser itself. And you can also find that through our web pages, or not only our webpage, but our Facebook and Instagram and every other, presence we have. So that's definitely the most useful thing and the most helpful thing. It takes very little, and so if people want to really get involved, that's the best way to do it for sure. And it doesn't go to us. So that, I don't know if that's something that been hopefully made pretty clear, is that the funding doesn't go, not a cent of it goes to any of us. It goes directly into our projects.
Yep.
So if you want to put it really into dramatic effect and get a lot of mileage out of a donation, that's about the best way to do it. In terms of us generally, and if you want to keep in touch with what we're doing down there and our other projects, the standard stuff of finding us on Facebook, which is just Phoenix Conservancy, and we're on Twitter and Instagram, Phoenix Conservancy. And then signing up for our newsletter, which goes out, I think, once a month. That kind of gives a pretty quick overview of what we're doing, and has things are progressing. And then one of the other great ways to support us that actually doesn't cost anything at all, if your users are probably already using this, but Amazon Smile, we actually get a pretty nice stream from that. And all that takes is, when you go shopping on Amazon.com, just go to smile.amazon.com. And it'll ask you to pick a charity, and if you pick us, it'll go straight to it.
And it costs no more. It's just it's just
all the
built
same
into your flow.
Exactly the same price. Just Amazon donates to whoever you choose. So pretty good deal. And I guess the last one, as I said, there's tons and tons of people doing really, really good work and spending their entire lives trying to turn things around in Madagascar. And one of the most direct things that you can do, especially if you're a foodie, is to specifically seek out Voatsiperifery pepper. So that's, again, incorruptible in terms of a resource. It has to be grown in rainforest. And Madagascar vanilla, and buy it, use it, and make awesome food with spices that directly go to keeping Madagascar's rainforest intact.
I love it. And at the same time, making your food taste super unique.
Oh, yeah. If you've never done anything with Madagascar vanilla, it's insane. It's so potent and so good.
Nice. Yeah, I'll have to grab some. Links from you.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you so much for your time. The work that the Phoenix Conservancy is doing, both locally, nationally, and internationally, is amazing. So I really appreciate the fact that you've taken some time out of your busy schedule to talk to me and to talk about the Madagascar Project, man. It sounds really cool.
Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate that. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and we'll definitely keep you posted on how things are going, and it's gaining momentum, so things should be going very well, very fast. So
yeah, it sounds really exciting. So yeah, we'll have to connect in the future about how things are, how successful you've been.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. You take it easy.
Thanks for joining. If you liked that episode, feel free to rate, view, and subscribe. That actually really helps. If you haven't seen it yet, take a look at the accompanying blog. Don't forget yourboots.com, where you can read more and see photos for all the interviews. Until next time.
Take care.